Good morning. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. It's a blessing to see all of you here early on a foggy Mother's Day. And I know you may have felt the same way when I woke up and I remembered that I was going to be talking with Alonzo King. I was so excited just from the moment I woke up. Every year, Grace Cathedral chooses a theme, and this year our theme is the body. And that theme is a theme that we use for our artists in residence. We use it for all our communications. It's a way of reflecting on something that we all share in common. And when we chose the theme of the body, our first idea was we would love to have Alonzo King be our artist in residence. And we just didn't think you'd say yes. It was a little bit like a marriage proposal. So Grace Cathedral is marrying up this year with Alonzo King. He is the founder of Lines Ballet, now in its 37th year. He's created hundreds of dance works. He's a recipient of numerous awards, including an honorary doctorate from Juilliard on May 24th. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So please join me in welcoming Alonzo King.
I joyfully accepted the wedding proposal, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. You grew up in Georgia, and your parents were involved in the civil rights movement. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your parents on this Mother's Day morning.
Sure. I was born in Albany, Georgia, and my father was the president of the Albany movement. And so he had interactions with Martin Luther King. He was very close with Malcolm X. And so it was a household that was filled with civil rights,
right,
but also with art. When I think about that period and recollect, I think that I was living with people who actually were willing to die for something that they believed in. And that was inspiring and intimidating.
Right.
Because when you recognize people and what they say and how they behave are in alignment,
right,
there's no contradiction.
Yes.
And so what they feel that they should do and what they want to do are in cohesion.
Right.
It's a very powerful force, because I don't remember having that kind of bravery. But they were really ready to lay down their lives for something that they believed in.
Yeah, somewhere.
And so my parents got divorced, and so I grew up in Santa Barbara, but I would go back and forth in the summers to visit.
Exactly. Somewhere you say, you talk very eloquently, and I saw a zillion different videos, read articles, and in one of them you talked about that a person who's deprived of art, just how limiting and how stunting that can be for a person.
Yes.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that. I didn't do a very good job of articulating it. You were very eloquent, but
I think that at its basis, art is the knowledge of how things are done.
Yeah.
And so there's an art of leadership,
right,
an art of governance,
yeah,
an art of raising children,
right,
agriculture. And so if we switch the word art with intelligence or intuitive knowing,
right,
then I think it makes more sense to people, because in our present understanding, if you talk to someone about art, the first thing they think is painting,
right,
or some kind of effete group off in some ivory tower who don't breathe oxygen.
Right.
And human beings, creativity is our nature.
Right.
That if when we have a creator.
Right.
And so that creator we mimic.
Yes.
And it is our nature to be involved in art.
Yeah, it's
and
funny.
I'm sorry, Mark, I just want to finish this line. And that what is neglected even in arts education is that the highest art is the art of living.
Yeah.
And that art of living is what great souls have exemplified through their lives.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about education, what children are receiving is not a real education, because if it doesn't involve a discipline in endurance, in recognizing that you are not just a human body,
Right.
that you are more than that, that there is a that there is a tripod of body, mind, and spirit is at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
You know, bottom's at the bottom, body's at the bottom, and mind is in the middle.
Right, right. Yeah, the Greeks had this word techne, which is the word for technology, technique, all those things.
Yes.
And the word carpenter doesn't appear in the Greek Bible. I mean, Jesus was had that technology of whatever the time was.
That's right.
And so the way we try to reconstruct that is by talking about his father being a kind of carpenter. But
Yes.
he was a trained person in the arts of the time.
Yes. There's some amazing writings about Christ and also his mother Mary in the Quran. Things that we don't get in the the
Yes.
regular Western Bible.
Yeah.
About there was a point where Joseph was making a chair, and that there was the measurements were a little bit off, and then Jesus went and he just moved the chair until it fit, and he made it fit perfectly. This is really
Right.
from the Quran.
Oh, I love that.
So, and the carpenter, and husbandry,
Right, right.
and that metaphor for reshaping and how to make wood not appear like wood, but liquid,
Right,
is
right.
very powerful.
Yeah.
And the idea that the theme that you've chosen for body, and when we think about technique, the body is the most highly advanced technical system that exists on planet Earth.
Right.
But we have not fully explored it. But the cerebral spinal centers in the body are electrifying windows that open up things that we in our what we call our normal day consciousness are not privy to.
Right.
One of the things that is remarkable, well, let me say it this way. All of us human beings, everyone in here and anyone who's listening, we have one thing in common. We want to avoid pain and suffering,
Right, right.
and we want some kind of joy that never goes stale.
Right.
And that paradigm makes all of our choices for us. Oh, I
Yeah.
think this will bring me joy. I think this will stop suffering. Some choices don't work,
Yeah.
some do. But
Yeah.
India is the only place that studied religion as a science.
Right, right.
I mean, as a science. And so the query was, does this practice eradicate suffering? Does this practice bring joy
Yeah.
that is ever new? And that application from the rishis in India is what brought yoga, not just the asanas, but the real internal process of self-discovery.
Right.
And a return to bliss that is the art of life.
Yeah, and the problem is we have this habituation. So if I ate that entire plate of muffins, which I was tempted to when I got here, eventually it wouldn't give me the same joy, And that's what we're fighting. Is
It would
that
give you pain.
It would give me a lot of pain, exactly. But yeah, that habituation is
Yes.
part of what we struggle. It's because that also is part of our nature.
That's right.
It's funny when you were talking about religion. The one religion program that's like the most scientific religion is UC Santa Barbara has a great religion department, and it may be one of the few public schools that is recognized for that so much. But tell me a little bit about your mother, and just what was she like, and tell me a little bit about how she exposed you to dance. Because when my son was 2 years old, we would play Cuban music and just dance in our apartment, and we had dancing was every day. We danced so much.
That is
And I
so
feel like we lost
fantastic.
something, and we're not doing that anymore. But
And why did that stop, Malcolm?
I don't know. I guess we just we I don't know. I don't at all know why it stopped.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, part of it was like I was a stay-at-home dad, so part of it stopped when I wasn't staying at home with
Yeah.
him anymore. And part of it was. I don't know. But that ecstatic of just putting on this music and just, he brought that to my life.
Yes.
And you and your mom, that you connected through dance too.
That's right. I'm going to tell you something about my mother that I usually don't talk about.
Yeah.
Once, I think I was like 10 or 11, and I'd won some award at school. And so I took the paper and I got home and I said, Mom. And she said, yeah. And I said, I got this award, look. And she said, does that make you happy?
I love that, though. I love that.
Not what I was expecting
Right,
to
completely.
hear. And then she said, do you think that I love you more now? And so she was training me.
Yeah.
Because it halted me.
Yes.
But she was saying, that you are fine just as you are.
And that's one of the things I most admire about you as a person. I mean, I was talking to our children today, and yesterday, I sat that we were having dinner, and I said, I want everybody to stop, and I want to say something I've never been able to say to you before. And that is that the two of you are absolutely like geniuses at conforming to things. Like if someone says, take this test, or these are the rules you have to follow, they are going to do incredible, but that's only part of life.
Yeah.
That part of life is discovering what you love and being able to think creatively. And the reason why you're standing here today and sitting with me is that you didn't feel that pressure to follow a more conventional path. You could be the superintendent of schools in Oakland, or there's you could be a partner in a law firm. There's a zillion things you could have done, a medical doctor, but you really listened to that voice of inspiration. To that, and so when you tell me that story about your mom, I said, oh my goodness. I mean, she understood that she needed to teach that to you.
Yeah. And both of my parents, they clearly said, you have to make your choice.
Yeah, exactly.
And they encouraged me in that. So when you have your first heroes,
right,
which are your parents, those are the first eyes that you look up into and stare at.
Yes.
And you adore them.
Right.
Until you become a teenager. and then you go through
It's differentiation. You have to see yourself. You have to see in what ways you're different than them.
And yet, when you go through that phase, you come out of it with a deeper appreciation for particularly if there's distance, and hearing stories about other people and their parents. You go, oh my God, how fortunate
it's
am
really
I?
True. It's really true.
But yeah, they were very powerful examples and very supportive. And I was taught to question everything.
Yeah.
So what if you read it in a book? So what if your
Right.
teacher said, you have to examine everything?
Yeah.
And when I review my education as a youth, because the early part of my education was in private Catholic schools, and all I really remember was one nun, very elderly, and she was filled with joy.
Yeah.
Not in an external way, but you could tell that there was some internal castle that was just brimming. You could just see it in her quietness, in her electrifying smile, and I thought, I want that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't remember anything that she taught me except really recognizing that this woman has an internal world and it is luminous.
Right.
It was very clear to me.
Yeah.
And as an altar boy, I remember, and I was such a fanatic, I would go to 5:30 to do so that I could do the one for the nuns, because there were just only the nuns and maybe 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And when people would come for the Eucharist, the elders, the look on their faces, the belief.
Oh, I know.
It was so deep.
It's so
deep.
deep.
As a little kid to witness that.
That's one of the most powerful. I mean, to be up at that cathedral and have everyone come and you give them all those delicious, wonderful bread, and you see what's happening. It's like I think it's one of the greatest honors of my life to be able to be in that little moment of where that God is speaking so clearly to people. And,
Yes.
Yeah, and it's great that you recognize that as a child.
It was miraculous.
It is miraculous. It is
It's
miraculous.
because you're watching transformation, and you're watching a living belief system that has no doubt.
Yes.
And that is remarkable.
It is remarkable. It is remarkable. So tell us a little bit about how dance came into your life.
Well, I always moved.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of normal for kids.
Yeah,
You
I do
know?
too. I do too.
And my mother was an amateur dancer. She took, what was it called? I think it was called creative expression when she was at university.
Oh, yeah.
Plus, she was a beautiful mover. And she would teach me things. But I also remember when she would move, her movement would be different than anyone else I'd ever seen.
Wow, that is fascinating, like a fingerprint.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And so to me, she was such an original because she was listening to herself. And I saw that if there was a group of people moving, that she was more in the music instead of on it.
Interesting.
And so that was kind of revelatory to me.
So what was your first experience of dancing with people who weren't in your family? I mean, how did that begin?
I tell you that it wasn't conscious.
Yeah.
I heard sound and I had to move.
Yeah.
I heard sound whether it was externally audible or internally audible.
Right.
That rhythm and movement, melody, timing, the look of things, and the way that the room is spaced or the way that nature was outside, I moved.
Right. What you said was thought. Music is like kind of the material of thought, and dance is the physical image of that thought.
Yes, that music, that everything is thought. This
Yeah.
whole creation is thought.
Right.
And the advanced scientists and physicists will tell you this is so mathematically precise, this is thought.
Yeah.
And so in that understanding, music is thought made audible.
Right.
And dance or movement is thought made visible.
Visible, yeah.
And so those two are interlinked.
Right.
Movement and sound, that's plus light.
Right.
That's the big one. That's all of creation.
Yeah.
Light, movement, sound.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that image of it. And just as you were coming here today, I was just thinking how important it is, for all of us to have dance in our life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I think of great dancing, I think of Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
I think of Gandhi.
Yeah.
I think of Harriet Tubman. Those are great movements.
Yeah, that's
You know, when we look at the cycles in life, there's great movements, and then there's static, and there's horror.
Right.
But it's all movement.
It is movement.
And so one thing that when I'm talking with lighting designers, I talk about the sun and how it's steady.
Yeah.
Whether there's clouds in front of it or not, it is there.
Right.
And how with just one little hand you can block it out, and yet it's enormous.
Right.
And that little hand is often the little ego, which
Yes.
can block out the light.
Right.
And also that it is impervious, that it's generous in its giving, whether you are murdering someone,
Right.
whether you are being kind,
Yeah.
whether there's the macabre dance of war
Yeah.
and degradation,
Right.
where we don't recognize each other,
Yes.
and where there's harmony. The sun continues to just give,
Yeah.
to just be present. And it's interesting that I read recently, which I found very inspiring, where a writer was saying that God is actually impartial, and karma will take care of you.
Right.
And so because the boomerang of cause and effect
Right.
is a law.
Yeah.
But God's ear is always open to whoever who's talking to him or her, whether that is complaining
Right.
or in gratitude, but it's the conversation.
Yeah.
It's the personal relationship. And so we make a choice. Do you look to the light or do you look to the darkness? They both exist.
Right.
But they say but it was so inspiring to read that because the machinery of karma will take care of itself, that the Divine Mother or the Heavenly Father
Right.
is looking to see if the heart is open and if there's a conversation.
Right, right.
Even if it's, you messed me up, and why don't you, as long as there's a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. In high school and college, like, what were those years like for you in terms of dance, and how was your worldview evolving as you made that transition from having your parents be your heroes to trying to figure out who you were?
Well, my father introduced me to yoga at a
Right.
young age.
Yeah.
He had a meditation room, and when we were kids, he would have us come in. He'd say, I want you to come in for just 5 minutes
Yeah.
and sit down, and please get up quietly when you leave.
Right.
And so we would sit down and we would imitate his postures, and we would giggle
Yeah.
and make faces, and then we would get up quietly and leave.
Right.
But it left a huge imprint.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I began, particularly as a young teenager, when hormones came in, I resisted that. I hated it.
Oh yeah. Right.
The transition.
Yes, it's such a huge change.
It was such a transition.
Yeah.
And it helped me tremendously. And so I never let go of that. But to answer your question directly, there was a period where I had to make a choice.
Yeah.
Because I was fortunate to have received lots of scholarships and invitations to Ivy League schools across the country.
Right.
And I had to think, what do I really want to
Right.
do?
What am
with
I going
my
to
life?
stand for?
Because I was interested in many things.
Yeah.
But I thought, what do I really, really love more than anything? And what do I think will fascinate me
Yes.
for a long time?
Yeah.
Avoiding pain, suffering, what will give you joy.
Right.
And I chose dance.
Yeah. That's an amazing choice. And how did the lines come into being? Like, how did that originate? What's its story of creation?
Robert Rosenwasser, who's sitting here with Pamela Hagen, the three of us had worked together in Santa Barbara. And we had put together an evening, and we had a company called Moya. And then we went our ways. And then when I moved to San Francisco, and then Pam and Robert moved to San Francisco, we said, let's start a company.
Wow.
I began with classes that were very, very well attended. But I had a little bit too much time on my hands, and that's dangerous.
Right, exactly, completely.
But I would teach 3 classes a day, and Pam said, well, let's start a company. And I thought, great, because I did not want to live in New York anymore.
Right.
And that's where I'd been training. And
It seems like it would be hard to leave that gravitational pull, but
not at all.
it was easy for you.
I mean,
You're coming back home.
Growing up in Santa Barbara, the awesome presence of mountains and ocean
Yeah, really.
is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is.
I
It's
mean,
an amazing place.
You stay in awe.
You do.
And then there's parts of Santa Barbara where there's no city lights,
Yeah.
and so you're in awe at night.
Right,
So
exactly.
you're not separated from nature, which
Yeah.
is why we're so denatured,
Yeah.
because we're surrounded by concrete. We can't see a horizon.
Right.
We don't see the presence
And
of
that
the
is New York
stars.
City. Yeah.
And I used to have to walk every day to a park just so I could get a vista or
Yeah.
be around nature. And I didn't want that anymore. And if
Yeah.
I got on one more subway, I was going to scream. So I had to return, but I had to find a place that had a thriving arts
Yeah,
culture,
yeah.
but also had accessibility to nature
Right.
and beauty.
That's what draws me here too. I mean, to be in an urban place that set aside so much of its environment as preserves,
Yeah.
and then just the bay and the
Yeah.
mountains and
In 5 minutes, you can be in you
Yeah.
could be in Muir Woods. You know,
yeah,
you could
exactly.
be-
And even just at the intersections, as you look over to your right, and there's the Marin Headlands.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful
exactly.
place.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. So, how do you think kind of the dance world has been changing over the course of your? I mean, it's been so long that you've been involved in this way, and how is it progressing or different than when you first started?
Malcolm, When I talked about the art of living,
Yeah.
that has been my obsession.
Yeah.
And so in a large way, the dance world is not my interest.
Right,
As
right.
odd as that may sound.
Yeah, yeah.
My interest is my development,
Right.
that from where I began, I want to be able, at the end of my life, to look back and say, well done.
Yes.
And so my urgency and my absorption and my vision is about transforming myself.
Right, right.
And so in any relationship, in the relationship with yourself, in the relationship with friends, family, discipline,
Right.
your God, nature, you realize life is about self-reform.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if I look and I see inequity anywhere,
Right,
in a
right.
system, in a human being, I still first have to begin with myself.
Right.
Do I have any trace of that in me?
Yeah.
Do I even have a sliver of that in me? Let me eradicate that first.
Right, right.
Before I point fingers
Right.
or act in any other way. Let me clean that up within myself first.
Right.
And so whatever I would have chosen as discipline, my real work is transformation.
Yeah.
My real work is self-reform. And I look at that in the dancers that I'm working with, the artists that I'm surrounded with, the people who I meet, whoever,
Yeah.
that it's how we behave. So beautiful,
Right.
because how we behave is what? It's the way you think and it's the way you move.
Right,
The way
right.
you go around is how you behave. That's what dancing is.
Yeah.
And
Just
so
paying attention to that.
Absolutely. And so dance, when people think of theatrical dance or great institutions, like New York City Ballet School, all of those places where I went, is a teeny little speck.
Yeah, right.
Because dance is all creation.
Right, right.
Do you get what I'm saying?
I do.
I mean, it's
do.
enormous.
It's almost like saying there's this whole world, but we're going to pay attention to this part of it, and that's what in paying attention to that part of it, you get a sense for what all of it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gandhi. You've heard the story about Gandhi. The mother says, "I want you to tell my son to give up sugar."
Yes.
And Gandhi goes and meets with him, but doesn't say anything about the
Yeah.
sugar. And a year later, he comes back, and she says, "I want you to talk to my son and tell him to give up sugar." And Gandhi goes to him and says, "You should give up sugar." And the mother says, "Well, what changed?" And he said, "Well, I hadn't given up sugar yet."
Yeah. Yeah. He had to stop doing it himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're working to teach beginners, what is it you're trying to do? Yeah, I mean, some of it must be helping them to have that feeling of being transformed.
I think the irony of what we call titles, if you say that you are a leader,
Yeah.
you're really a servant.
Right.
That's
right.
the truth of it.
It is. You're
It's
totally
about
right.
service.
Completely.
If-
That's what Jesus says. Servant.
Yes.
We call it servant leadership in the church. Servant leadership.
Servant
Like,
leadership.
And Jesus says, "Whoever is greatest must be servant of all." That's him.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And so a teacher, what do you realize? You're being taught by working with students.
That's great.
But one of the things that you recognize is that human beings are inherently brilliant, fascinating. Brilliant and fascinating. What does that mean for people who don't recognize that? Everyone is brilliant and fascinating, but some of us are blocked.
Right. Right.
And so, again, we're talking about movement. And so movement can't be interrupted. And that's what blocks are. Blocks can be due to trauma.
Right.
Blocks can be due to early environment. Blocks can be due to systems of oppression.
Right.
And that blocks energy, which means something is stuck, which means something is not whole. WHOLE,
Right.
which means something is not holy, HOLY.
Right.
So that wholeness is due to an integration and, most importantly, an uninterrupted flow.
Yeah.
And so we are all sons, regardless of sex. That's not what it is. It's another level. We are shining suns.
Right.
And when we see those suns not shining, we want to go into healing. in any kind of process.
Yeah.
Healing of mind, healing of body, healing of soul.
Right.
A soul meaning that it doesn't recognize it's a soul. It thinks that the only thing that it is this body.
Right.
And that there's no other realm of perception. That's a sickness.
Right. Yeah. We have a tradition here. We take questions from everybody. So you'll have a little note card there, and then Rebecca Nessa will come and collect your questions. But we often have some very, very extraordinary questions from people. When you think about other choreographers or other dancers, who are some of the people that you see that excite you, that you're interested in their work?
People who are telling the truth.
Yeah.
From, one of the keynotes in life is struggle. And so anything that you have that at some point is pure like the child or pure like amazing dance can be corrupted.
Right.
And so there's the constant fight. In the body, it's germs, disease.
Completely.
It's the same application to the mind.
Yeah.
Is germs and disease, ways of thinking that are so negative that they can destroy you.
Yes, exactly.
And so when you see what people call, let's say, hula, and what dancers would call airport dances, they're a mockery of what the real spiritual dance is.
Right.
If you look at ancient traditional hula, that is some deeply rooted psychophysiological spiritual language.
Right.
That's what that is in
Ancient.
movement.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
My wife dances hula.
Oh, you're kidding.
That is so in my wedding, my most powerful memory is her standing in this beautiful, long wedding dress and dancing, and like the world stopped.
Yes.
And like everything.
As it should.
It stopped, and was revolving around her.
Yes.
And her and it's one of the most powerful memories I've ever had. And you're right, it was like you saw through her into the world.
Yes. And so.
But it's not, you're right, it's not like the tourist.
It's not to show.
Yeah.
It's not to show, it's to be. And this is why in my training, and I would hope that, in a lot of other people, it's not about getting a job.
Right.
It's about the experience of the training itself. It's transforming you.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're not trying to be a product. You're not trying to just be a machine of skill. You want to be a transformed human being, and movement itself and music, rhythm can heal a troubled mind, a mind that's out of sync.
Right.
Tics can be worked out of a troubled body through movement and through sound.
Yeah.
There's all this new study now about sound and its effect on you. I was just reading in the New Yorker how if it's like 2:30 in the morning, one motorcycle going through the city can wake up thousands of people.
Right, it's really true.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. It makes all the sense in the world.
And there was talk about pre-9/11, the noise that was in the ocean and the damage that was being done to whales and fish, because there's all tuning porpoises on sound, echolocation. And that right at 9/11, airplanes stopped, movement on the ocean stopped, and there was a huge healing that they did by testing whale poop and other products from animals, how the stress levels had dropped hugely because nothing was happening. The ocean was quiet again. And then right after, it picked up, and then all the disturbances. And so they were saying that sound pollution is the next big one that we're going to be obsessed with.
I can't wait. I've got a book to share with you. I'll tell you about it later. But it's called 1 Square Inch of Silence. It's this person who's basically said, I want to protect areas of silence.
Yes.
Just in the same way that you would protect endangered species and landscape.
Exactly.
But it is, this is great. You are amazing. Please speak about some of the collaborations you have done with a wide range of artists. It's good to have a
Okay.
fan out there.
I would say that everybody is amazing if we just look. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about it. There's this thing about special this or special that. Everyone's special. I mean, when we were born and our family and our parents were looking at us and their jaws were dropped and tears were coming out
Yeah.
and they were in awe. And like now, when every parent will say, "Do you want to see my kids?" and they show me on their cell phone about their new babies, you're in awe. And so what you were in awe of is still inside of us. And what does that mean? We have to fight against the hardness that comes from living in a brutal world and what we call age. You have to fight for that mental plasticity. And one of the things that helps in that struggle is gratitude. Gratitude. Everyone's beautiful. I'm not talking about Hollywood. I'm talking about real beauty. Truth and beauty are the same. Now, back to that question.
I love that. Truth and beauty and love are the same.
They're the same.
Yeah.
They're the same.
Yeah, I feel that very strongly.
Lines has been fortunate to work with some of the biggest names. The one that comes immediately is the Shaolin monks. We did works with them. Bernice Johnson Reagan of Sweet Honey in the Rock. Tons of, my mind is dropping. Robert, you would be able to spiel this off more than me. Zakir Hussain, Kronos Quartet. I mean, it's just endless. We've been around for 35 years, and we've worked with extraordinary musicians, designers, artists, dancers, librettos, you name it. We have been fortunate to work with brilliant people. Some of those brilliant people are incredibly well known, famous, and some of them are not, but they're all equally brilliant. I just want to say one thing. What a lot of people don't realize is that there are brilliant artists and people who are not interested in the eyes of the world on them. And people say, "Oh, well, then they must not be good," or "That's so strange." No. They want their anonymity. They treasure it. And their art that they were making was not about a display to people. It was for their own internal peace. It was for their own development. And there's tons of people like that where they're not looking for the eyes of the world to be on them. They want to just make art.
Yeah, that makes me so happy to think that just the people you see are just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
You know, there are all these other extraordinary, skilled people who are honing what they love.
Absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about like your creative process? Like if someone, like when you're choreographing a piece, like how do you start? Like what do you do? I know what it's like to write a sermon.
Yes.
But I have no idea like how you start on.
But did you hear what Malcolm just said? He knows what it's like to write a sermon.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. You have a blank piece of paper.
It's a blank piece of paper.
And you have thought.
You have thought, and
you
have
begin with an idea.
And you may have like do Greek translations, and you may walk back and forth, and you may talk to people who you say, "Oh, well, what do you think of what Jesus said this week?" And but like, so what is it with dance? Is it you have this image or feeling, or?
I think that there's two things. First, there has to be an idea.
Yeah.
So when, in the idea of Zeus, Athena jumped from out of his head, right?
Right.
And so that means that it's born in the world of ideas. In that world, sometimes you will have a blueprint that is clear to you as a bell.
Yeah.
And then you go reconstruct.
I totally know what you're talking about.
You may have a dream,
Yeah.
and you reconstruct.
Dreams help.
If you don't, and you go into the studio, you, as in writing, you just start writing.
Yeah.
Don't judge it, just start writing and see what comes out. And then if you have a definite place you want to go, like I have a plan, I'm sticking to my plan, you go with that. Aim for your goal, but then let it go and let go of your plans and see what is coming through that needs to be said. Now this is important because I may have, let's say that I'm an orator. I may come to a congregation and say, this is what I want to talk about.
Right.
I feel really good about it.
Yes.
It's really well sculpted.
Right.
I've reread it many times. I showed it to my wife. She said it was great.
Yes, right.
And so,
Completely.
and then I come to the congregation,
Right.
and I feel from them, this is not what they need to hear right now.
Amen. Amen. You're right. But that's what it is. A large part of it is just imagining what is it going to feel like at 8:30 on Mother's Day in the Chapel of Grace. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and that's so much of it is being able to understand what you're saying is going to feel like to other people. And I can imagine dance being that way too. It's just like their movements affect us in a deep and unconscious way.
Yes.
And you will have an idea of what a movement will do, and you can think of it in a very clear way, but for me, it's more of a subconscious experience of what that means. I mean, we had this Me Too concert on Friday night, Saturday night, last night.
Yeah.
And there was one piece where the singers were lined up in 7 people, and the person would touch the person, and they would sing, and the touch person, they would sing. But it was almost, there's so much happening, it almost required that touch in order for them to sing the song.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't just like they were decoration.
Yeah.
It required to sing the song. And that's what I'm talking about here with you. It's just you understand in explicit terms what we sense and feel, but wouldn't know to put together in that same way.
I think that after you've been working, building, creating for a long time, you begin to realize that you are not the doer.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You're right.
You may be excavating.
It's a gift to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you speak, there's a wonderful book, I think it's from the early 20s. I don't know if it's out there anymore, but it's called Conversations with Great Composers. And each of them talks about, if you say to any composer, do you have a favorite work? Yes. I mean, do you have a favorite work that's your own?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you tell me about it? It was a gift. It was an inspiration. There was a quieting of the mind.
Yes.
The mental chatter of my neurotic mental roommate.
Completely.
Shut up.
They're going to hate me. This is terrible. It's too long. Yeah.
And I began to listen. And that's what, in any relationship, it's about the depth of your listening. Yeah. Good listening is not very common because you have to get yourself out of the way. And so when the vessel is empty, the muse can enter.
Yeah.
And so that is a big part of the process of getting out of the way and seeing what is being said. When these composers said they couldn't remember anymore, that's when they went into intelligence, logic, trends of the time, familiar structures.
Right. Familiar structures, I can imagine that.
And so everyone is in their digging is looking for the gold vein.
Yeah.
And that comes through mostly through the ability to relax and let go, to realize that you are not the doer, that the author is not the last word if you think you're the author.
Right.
And, and to just be.
Yes. Cultivating a spirit of invitation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And there must be like different structures in dance where you think, is there anything in you where like I definitely have, this is the 3-point sermon structure. It's coming out. It's not every week, but are there things like that? Like almost like building blocks.
Absolutely. There's in any kind of what we call balance structure, the way it looks can be a million different ways, but there is balance.
I love that.
And what was I going to say? There's, and I think it's a part of the practice if you have been working a certain way to break it up.
Yeah, right.
To break it up.
Yeah.
But there's also this, especially currently, there's this idea about innovation and curiosity. Innovation isn't really necessary.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's very interesting because there is nothing, Bach didn't change anything.
Yeah.
He worked within existing structures and look what he did.
Right.
And in his voice, he said, I compose to prove that there is a God.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. My old choir director gave me a biography of Bach. I just cannot wait to read it.
It's just
for that
amazing.
reason.
And
Yeah.
so, and what's amazing to me is he, in that work, was showing how human beings can live. What was he saying? He was exemplifying mind, the brilliance of mind,
Right.
order, the intricacy of repetition,
Right.
and how it can be replayed just like a mathematical equation,
Yeah.
and the heart.
The heart's true.
The heart of devotion.
Yeah.
And so we have the mind and the heart in perfect balance.
Right.
This is talking about human beings.
Yes.
Too much mind is dry,
Yeah.
calculated, predictable. An imbalance of feeling is indulgent, chaotic,
Right.
illegible. And so you have to get them to a high level where they both are sublime, because they're both intelligences.
Yeah.
The heart has intelligence. In our current culture, we deny it based on misogyny and all kinds of what we call touchy-feely, which is nonsense.
Yeah.
The heart knows.
It does.
And given any kind of demographic, the CEO is going to say, what do I feel?
Right.
And so when Bach is talking about the heart and the mind in balance and all of that exquisite music, it is still a communication of how do we behave.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. There's a philosopher, Martha Nussbaum, who wrote a book called Love's Knowledge, and that's exactly what it's about. The philosophers
knowledge.
don't pay enough attention to love and the
That's
way
right.
we're moved by the heart.
That's right.
Okay. I feel so grateful and privileged to dance with the amazing Kathy Mata at AKLB. How do you recognize and find teachers who are such an inspiration and blessing to their students and the community? Or do they find you?
I think, I don't know who you are, but thank you for saying that. Kathy is amazing. And I think that lines, or any of us, what is yours will be drawn to you. Whether it's bitter or sweet, it's coming.
I love that. That's great.
And so she came. And I don't mean bittersweet to her. I'm just talking about
Yes, in
us as
general,
human beings.
right.
What we have stirred, what we have churned in the ether is inevitable.
Right.
What we call ours will come to us.
And
We'll
some of it
feel
may be as a result of these terrible personality flaws that we have, and others will be our most beautiful grace.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the political scene is a little bit like that.
Yes.
Just like these little elements of particular politician's character become magnified
Yes.
massively. Okay. Was there a time, event, era, or moment where dance or ballet began to become more and more an expression of spirit and the light within? Or was it clearly there at the start?
To talk in technical terms, the term ballet is an Italian word for dance, plain and simple. We have made it like a brand label, like Gucci.
That's funny. That's right. Right.
Or give
Yeah.
me another one.
Levi's.
But the correct term is Western classical dance. Now, what does that mean? Dance in this region, dance in another region, dance in another region. The classical ideal is practiced across the globe. Now, there was a perversion. Well, let me make it even clearer. There was dance for folk. There was, which is incredibly profound, because just dance for folk, just like fairy tales, there are metaphysical truths that are hidden in those stories. This was the same in folk dance. And what people now call character dance. There was also dance for the king or the czar. When there was royal patronage that entered Western classical dance, that's when the corruption happened, because you were no longer dancing for spirit, because there was movement in the church from the very beginning. You were dancing to please the king. And what could the king do? The king could change your life. The king could radically change your circumstances. And so the approach was for the king. And that's where all of that coquettishness came in, that sense of display instead of internal truth. And so that was the early corruption, because its nascence was in faith and in the church. Its nascence was connected to all the primordial cultures who used movement as a way to receive information. And so the purity, just as we were talking earlier, gets corrupted and it has to be brought back. You talk to ballet, you use the term today, people immediately think racism, exclusivity, a social bauble for the wealthy. All nonsense. Because in its beginning, these were metaphysical truths. What do I mean by that? Did someone say, I'm going to invent pirouette? Come on, that's ridiculous. They're whirlpools and eddies. What is the earth doing? Spinning on its axis. All of the information that is in what we call Western classical dance is the same information that Copernicus plied from watching nature and that Ptolemy, thousands of years before him. And so it's nature is the informer, not beginning with Catherine Medici, as the ballet history books say. It's a joke. Yeah. It's nature, the same that informed all the dancing nations, all the dancing countries, villages. It was nature who inspired how to move. They say that, you've all heard this, that the greatest invention in the beginning of time was the wheel. What was the wheel? It was contemplatives watching the sun in its orbit, that circle repeatedly, sunrise to sunset. That's the wheel. And so it was nature, as it does now, which is the great informer. And ballet has become denatured, as have so many of us. But we have to go back to its beginning. And its beginning was spirit, plain and simple.
It's so interesting to think about how you bring that sensibility back into something that its heart has it already.
Yes.
Your posters and other advertising have always captivated me by their beauty. Please say something about your photographer and how that vision speaks for your program. A great idea of the visual. It's funny to think of dance being frozen, but that's part of your work too, to figure out how to do that.
Yeah. From the very beginning, Robert and I were very interested in having motion speak.
Yes, exactly.
And that meant symbol, metaphor, and movement.
Yeah.
And so we have worked with some amazing photographers, but without Robert guiding those photographers, and without those brilliant dancers understanding how to disappear into an idea and not show off, or not want to be seen, but like a good messenger wanting the message to be clearer than them.
Yes.
You produce a whole different kind of imagery.
Yeah, that's
fascinating. So it begins
with that philosophy of life.
With that philosophy.
It
begins with that philosophy. In the same way that if you look at Quaker furniture, they were not trying to be stylistic. It was a belief about economy. It was a belief about efficiency. It was a belief about simplicity as reflected in the divine. And so now it's become the style that people copy, but in its origin, it was a reflection of their spiritual view. Isn't that interesting?
I love that. I love that. Why did you choose the ballet as a medium rather than modern contemporary? I would love to see your work on contemporary dancers with no shoes. I don't know if that's right, the no shoes part.
With no shoes.
Okay, good. The Hawaiians don't wear shoes.
This I could answer so many ways, but let me start. We've done many ballets that are not on point, but they always wear shoes to protect their feet. But the notion of contemporary, for me, means relevancy. Shakespeare is a contemporary and will always be into eternity. No one understands the human condition like Shakespeare. This will be a Bible into eternity.
All right.
Bach is contemporary. He's not old. He's ever new, because it is the truth. And so these terms, again, ballet, what does ballet mean? Dance. And so the divisions of modern, a lot of those are emphases. If you begin to look at what we call early modern, and this is going to really get me in trouble, but, well, let me say it so it doesn't get me in trouble.
Yeah.
There was a period where brilliant thinking human beings said, why are these adult women with little wings on their back? This is not talking about the human experience and the broadness of its character. This seems to be a diminution of the power of women, or the power of living human beings who are living rigorous, rough lives. I don't see that represented. And so there was a sweep away from Western classical dance by some brilliant pioneers. And then there were other pioneers who said, why throw the baby out with the bathwater? Let's just resurrect, reinvigorate, reinfuse, use what is good here, and continue to explore. And so in a large way, you find now there's such a mix, and that is going to continue the mix. What is the mix? To really break it down, it's the idea of romanticism and classicism combined.
Right.
What does that mean? It means that in the romantic ideal, as an individual, I feel that what I'm experiencing is so profound that it has universal reach. What is the classical ideal? The individual does not matter. What matters is the society, the community, harmony, and balance. It's impossible to have a classical work without romantic ideals. It's impossible to do a romantic work that's completely romantic and needs classical ideals. They work together. And what's inspiring? They exemplify what I was talking about earlier, the balance of heart and mind that Bach so clearly illustrates for us. What is it? What is heart and mind? What is it? East and west. What is that? Left brain and right brain. And so in a large way, when people say modern or this, it's kind of like labeling the races. What is that? It's like, I'm not interested. I'm interested in the human being. Does this make sense to you? Yeah.
It does, and we are still in the Romantic Revolution is continuing on, and here we are, the two of us as the 21st century version of that. Thank you for taking my question, but more importantly, thank you for your vision. Speaking of vision, do you envision tiny dancers? I danced in my youth, but was discouraged by my teacher because I am short. This question is for future dancers with 3 hearts. I'm glad to someone talking about bodies.
I think the person who wrote this, thank you first for that question. Thank you for your 3 hearts, and I hope you've forgiven your teacher. Because that was ignorance, and it was cruel. Now, let me explain part 2. You are supposed to be exposed to ignorance and cruelty. You're supposed to. When you set a goal, you have to be challenged. It's a difficult thing to say and a difficult thing to hear. Why? Because children are precious. And what you say to a young mind, young mind is like wax, and you can do an imprint on that mind that will take years of therapy to eradicate. And so how you speak to a child is hugely important. Hugely. And so this is a large topic because it encompasses the idea of what talent is. Talent has nothing to do with your body. People, mostly in dance, think that a facile body is a talented body. No, what you're working on is the mind and the heart. Back to that theme again. I've had people come up to me and say, Mr. King, I used to dance. And I said, oh, did you love it? And they said, I did, but then my teacher told me that my butt was too big, I had bad feet, I was too tall, I was too short. And I think to myself, what someone else said to you made you stop? That was the first test, I'm sorry. You flunked the love test. I don't give a damn what you say. Dance is mine. That has to be the position. Bless you. Unless that was an amen.
It's a little bit of both.
And so it goes again back to the parents. Have you given the child the fiber of self-belief? Have you told the child that you are perfect just as you are? Hard thing for people to hear, but it's true. That's what's so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's true. And our lives are what? Our whole life is to remember that reality. So at the end of your life, you remember that reality. We're stamped with him. We're stamped with perfection, no way away from it. That's why one of the worst things that has been introduced into the human mind for generations is the idea that I am a sinner. Horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible, crippling thought.
Instead, I'm made in the image of God.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And do I make mistakes? Yes, you're supposed to.
Yeah.
No one's born with the primer, and then this, and when this happens, and no. You're supposed to fall. That's what brings humility. So back to your question, in lines long history, people say, oh, tall, but we've had every kind of dancer. But they first have to be an exceptional dancer, regardless. And your teacher, that was a cruel thing, but cruelty, I know it's hard to say. Let's say it another way. Obstacle. Obstacle is meant to jolt us and wake up what is latent within us in terms of strength that would have otherwise not come to the fore, and we would have remained cream puffs. Obstacle is the slap in the face to challenge you and say, no, I can overcome this. How we think is everything.
That must be the most powerful thing I've heard all week in terms of, because I do, and there were these moments where people were very unkind or cruel, and it makes it so much easier for me to kind of move beyond that and to forgive when I think of that as being part of the role of creating who I am, and I do feel like those kinds of things prepare us for what is next. And you're right, if we love dance so much, then no one's saying to me, I've got a big butt or my feet aren't right. That won't hold me back. But it's been such a pleasure to have you. It's just like all week long I was dreaming about this, and it was just as good as I had hoped it would be. I'm so grateful that you were here, and I can't wait. I mean, we've got so many great things planned for this next year. We're looking forward to hearing from you in many different ways. Visually, dancing, hearing you speak, and this is just the beginning of a really beautiful thing.
Well, I'm so honored to have been invited by you and your community. And it's just wonderful to be here, and I'm looking to share and give as much as we can, because life should be chiefly service, and I'm ready to serve.
Yeah, thank you.